Brian Wilson wasn't just the leader of the Beach Boys, he was the mastermind behind their sound. While the band became famous in the early 60s for surf anthems like Surfin' USA, Fun, 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 and I Get Around, Brian was always pushing for something more. He had an ear for harmonies unlike anyone else and a deep obsession with making music that wasn't just catchy, but emotionally and sonically revolutionary. By 1964, the pressure of constant touring was wearing on him, and he suffered a panic attack on a flight, which led him to quit the road and focus entirely on writing and producing. That's when he created Pet Sounds, 1966, a deeply personal, orchestral, and melancholic album that redefined what pop music could be. While it wasn't a massive commercial success at the time, musicians, especially the Beatles, recognized its brilliance. Pet Sounds pushed Brian even further creatively, and he immediately set to work on what he hoped would be his masterpiece, Smile. But Smile never happened, at least not in the way Brian envisioned. By 1967, the pressure to top himself, combined with drugs, particularly LSD, mental illness, and worsening paranoia, caused him to spiral. He started hearing voices, auditory hallucinations that would torment him for decades. He became increasingly withdrawn, growing obsessed with perfection in the studio, while the rest of the band grew frustrated. Eventually, Smile collapsed under its own weight, and Brian retreated from the world. By the 1970s, Brian was barely functioning. He spent years in a fog, gaining hundreds of pounds, but using drugs heavily, and at his lowest point, he spent nearly 3 years in bed, barely speaking to anyone. His family and bandmates didn't know what to do. That's when Dr. Eugene Landy entered the picture. At first, Landy seemed to help. He got Brian out of bed, got him moving, and re-engaged in music. But over time, Landy took total control of Brian's life. He isolated him, over-medicated him, and dictated everything from his finances to his relationships. By the 1980s, Brian was a shell of himself, trapped in a toxic, manipulative relationship with the one person who was supposed to be helping him. That's where Love and Mercy picks up, telling Brian's story in two timelines. The younger Brian, Paul Dano, at his creative peak, but on the verge of collapse, and the older Brian, John Cusack, trapped under Landy's control in the 80s, trying to find a way out with the help of Melinda Ledbetter, the woman who would ultimately save him. Knowing all this will help Tom appreciate just how much Brian went through and how incredible it is that he survived. The film isn't just about music, it's about the price of genius, mental illness, manipulation, and ultimately, redemption.